This is an interview for the Jewish Federation of Nashville Holocaust Project with Elsa Herzfeld, who was born in Saarlouis, Germany. And the date of this interview is May 6, 1990. Mrs. Herzfeld, can you talk about what life was like for you before the war in the town where you lived?
First of all, I left long before the war. The war really only started in 1939, and I left Germany in 1937. So I wasn't really I wasn't there when the war was on.
But before the war, can you talk about your school,
Well,
your family, your friends?
We lived in a small town in Erfelden, which was about 20 minutes by train from a larger city, Darmstadt, which is about 15 miles south of Frankfurt.
Could you spell that?
Frankfurt?
Erfeld.
Erfelden is E-R-F-E-L-D-E-N, am Rhein. And we lived sort of a nice, comfortable life.
How big was your family?
My father and mother and my younger brother, and I and my grandmother lived with us most of the time. My mother's mother lived with us most of the time. My mother had a sister who lived on the North Sea, so my grandmother often spent 3 months, the summer months, on the North Sea with her, but otherwise that was our little family.
And can you talk about your school?
Well, for the first 4 years, I went to a regular school. They call it Volksschule. And most of the people in Germany, their children went to that school for 8 years, and that was the end of their schooling. But for the people who were interested in education and had the money to send their children to after the 4th grade, you started, well, I don't know. It was not just a private school like they have here. You had to pay for it, but it still was more of a city school, but it was only for girls. And that's where I went after the 4th grade.
And was this
and I went in Germany, one either went till 16, but if you wanted to go and have a college education, you mostly went to 13 grades really, and made this Abitur they called, and then you went on to a university. But first of all, I kind of thought I would like to do that, but I was no longer allowed to do that because you couldn't go where you wanted to go. So I went to school until I was 16, to that, which was really the usual thing for people who had the means. Most of them, as I said, only stayed in that other school for 8 years, and that was it.
So you went to school until you were 16?
Yeah. And then I went to a business college afterwards because my father thought that anything I could learn to make it in the world, I should do that. In fact, I sometimes think it's funny what all I did. While we were waiting to leave Germany, I could no longer go to school. So I went to that business college, and then I went to a place where I learned to sew, to try to learn to make patterns. I went to a convent for about 2 months to learn how do you do that? Like if your sheets tear, to mend them or something. Little did I know that in the United States you don't mend sheets or something. But my mother and father thought whatever you learn might benefit you, and so that was it.
And when did you leave Germany?
I left Germany on the 26th of March, 1937, and I left by myself because I was the only one in the family who had a passport. And my passport expired on April the 2nd, so I had to get out. My parents and my brother got their passport later, and they went through doing what we really needed to do. So I was in the United States 4 weeks before they came. So I sat in New York, shaking and trembling, wondering if I'd ever see them again, but they made it out too.
And did they make it out?
Yeah, they came out too. And they got here in April, and we came to Nashville. We stayed in New York 10 days, and then we came to Nashville. I never will forget it, on the 10th of May, 1937, one of the hottest days, they said, in Nashville's history. There we came from this beautiful temperate climate into 95 degrees in the sun, in the shade, but that's how long.
Quite a change.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a few more things about your life in Germany before we move on. Was there any kind of Jewish education?
Yes, there was Jewish education once or twice a week. I forgot it. We had kind of 2 afternoons a week, I think. I had to go to we call it Hebrew school, I suppose, or religious, and a young rabbi was teaching that. Yeah, we had religious education.
So this was Hebrew as well as history and
all that,
other subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And were you involved in any kind of activities outside of school?
Like what?
Well, any kind of youth activities, like were there clubs or like the kids have now? Or
I don't think they had
groups?
that then. I don't think they had that. I think we went to school and did our homework and, and played ball or something, but nothing organized. Nothing organized.
Now, when the Nazis came to power, how did this first affect you and your family?
Well, I think right at first it probably affected us very little at first. There were some girls in my class who already were in the youth movement. I think little did they know at that time what that was all about. But then little by little, my father's business went under because nobody was allowed to trade with him anymore. In school, all my non-Jewish girlfriends wouldn't have contact with me anymore.
About what year was this?
Well, it probably started in 1934, I would say. Hitler came to power in 1933, but I'm not aware of it, that it came like the next day or so that you noticed it. But little by little, and then the SR marched by our house singing, wenn das Judenblut vom Messer spritzt, which means when the Jewish blood comes off the knife, and those kind of things. And then came boycotts that people were not allowed to trade in Jewish stores. You could no longer go to concerts, to opera, like I was at the age where girls went to took dancing lessons, and I was not able to be involved in those things. So those were the first realization of what went on. Even so, I think it's so strange that lots of these German people really at the very first did not know really what it was all about, because I know there was a boy who really apparently liked me a lot, and he looked like the picture of a German boy, blonde, blue-eyed, tall, a member of the youth Hitler Jugend, and he would come and like ask me to go wherever young people go. And my father said, ask him if he wants to go to the concentration camp with you, he can come, but otherwise don't. So they didn't quite realize what it was all about at first, I think.
They saw no conflict, and he saw no conflict in it?
It's amazing, isn't it, that they didn't realize but they were in such a, Hitler at first kept these people in such a celebrating mood or something. They would march and torch things and whatnot. And I think many of them joined that at first, really not, at least in my opinion, not realizing what this was all about. Really, they were just sort of swept away with a hurrah, really. I don't think at least I think that.
What kind of business did your father have?
He was in the, how should I say, hides and furs, and also he sold casings for sausages and things like that. That was his business.
And his business dropped off?
Because of that. And then we moved from this little town to the larger town. I mean, by the way, when I said I went to school for 4 years, I went to school in Erfelden, but then they had no high school in Erfelden, so I had to take the train every day to Darmstadt. That's where the high school was.
And then you moved to
Yeah, we
there?
moved there, yeah.
And what year was this about?
In 35, I think we moved there. Yeah.
Do you remember any other reactions by the non-Jewish population to the Nazi rule? You mentioned that boy.
Yeah, well, it was just, you just weren't free to do what you wanted to do. You just couldn't take part in anything which went on, and then this constant fear that they would see. My brother was still a young boy. He was almost 3 years younger than I, but there was this constant fear that they would pick up my father to put him in a concentration camp, because they did do that at that time already. Some people we knew, one man, he stood on the street while they constantly had parades under Hitler at first, constant parades, and it was hot, and he would just scratch his head, and they said that it was a sign of saying that they think they're crazy or something, and off he was hauled into the concentration camp. My parents owned this apartment house in Germany. Most of the apartments were rented out, and of all things, one apartment was rented out to an FBI man who lived there for quite a few years. Well, we were scared to death of him. That my father had to grant him every wish. I mean, for fear that he would say something.
FBI?
I mean, the German FBI.
German, okay.
Geheime Staatspolizei it was called, and not the FBI, something equivalent to the FBI.
Just to get it straight.
Yeah. So we lived in constant fear that he was going to be hauled off. That was the biggest thing, that you were constantly afraid that your father or was going to be hauled off at that time. So.
And then when you moved
to Darmstadt,
then what was your life like? Did your father have
he didn't have
a job?
No, he had to give up. He had to wind his business down, and we waited then to come to the United States. We sort of got things rolling to come over here.
So you realized then that
it was time. And the strange thing is, I say this so often, my mother was really sort of responsible for us getting out, because she was a people person, and it hurt her terribly that her friends no longer would say hello to her. My father wasn't quite like that. I think if it wasn't for my mother, we all would have ended up in the concentration camp. But it hurt her so much to be not, I don't know how she should say. I mean, nobody said hello to her anymore. She said, I cannot live under those circumstances. So.
Now you said you were the only one who had a passport? I
was the only one who had a passport because it was very difficult to get passports, for Jews to get passports. And we felt like one of us needs a passport. And well, this is another part of my family, my mother's brother, and also my mother's sister lived in Wilhelmshaven, which is on the North Sea, I told you. And they had to flee overnight, my mother's brother, and they had a uniform business in Wilhelmshaven, and somebody threatened them, and they had to flee overnight. They just, with nothing, I mean, they just took their pocketbooks and went, and they, at that time, of all things, they had a son and a daughter. They spent their summer vacation with us, and my aunt and uncle, they had fled over the border to France, to Forbach. And so we said, I wanted to visit them, and somehow, it was very difficult, but somehow I finagled a passport. But they gave it to me only for a very short period, I think no longer than 6 months, and they wouldn't renew it and so on. And my parents and my brother also had a very hard time to get that passport. So I had to, my passport, I landed in the United States on the 2nd of April, and I think my passport expired on the 6th of April. So I just barely made it. So that's why I had to leave Germany before they did, because my passport was about to expire.
So it was then or never.
And I was 18 at the time. I think back sometimes, I think I was really something, wasn't I? at that time to come to the United States, to a country I was far away from us, and so, but that was it.
Now, what about the rest of the family? How did they get passports?
Well, they got a passport. They got a
needed?
passport. We all got the affidavit at the same time, but the passport, they somehow, I forgot how, but they all got passports, and they all got out, and I waited for them in New York, and we were reunited.
Now, how did you wait in New York? Did you know somebody?
I waited in here. Well, I knew, see, at that time, most everybody knew somebody because other people had immigrated. And so I had this boy I used to date when I was 17 and he was 19, a little bit, and then I had somebody from that little country town where we lived, and he got me a room. I think, his name was, I even forgot his name. Anyway, he and 2 members from Council of Jewish Women, I think, picked me up on the dock. And they had gotten me a room with also a German Jewish family in Manhattan. And so I knew some people. So I hung around there for 4 weeks. And my only problem really was that I had just about no money. And I worried about my father and mother and my brother getting out. But otherwise, I sort of had a nice, jolly time, more or less.
So then when the rest of your family came, you met them in New York?
Right.
And what did you do from there? Did you stay in New York?
No, we came to Nashville. We came to Nashville because the only people in the United States, really outside of those German immigrants in New York, the only people we knew in the United States was Mortimer and Gertrude May. And that is mentioned in this thing. They're the only ones we knew. And they really, against their wishes, I must say, Mortimer said, why come to Nashville? He didn't really like Nashville, even so he lived here all his life.
He didn't like it?
I mean, he liked it, but he said, why not go to California? He loved California. And he said, why not go to California? And in retrospect, I feel like, too, we could have been just as poor in California as we were in Nashville, wouldn't it? We would have had to start...
Really poor.
And I thought, wouldn't it have been, but what did we know about the United States? What did we know about a new country? Nothing.
Now, how did Mortimer May know you?
Well, that was really, we knew Lily and Erna. I don't know if you know Lily Levy and Erna Price. And their family, they lived across the street from us in Germany, in this little town. And we knew that family, and it was their uncle. I mean, not Mortimer wasn't their uncle. Mortimer was their cousin, really, but Jacob May was their uncle. So somehow we met we met the Mortimer Mays through them, and they came visiting in Germany a lot. We visited them. I never will forget when I saw Reba May the first time. I thought I never have seen anything as beautiful in all my life. You don't know Reba, I guess.
No.
But I thought I have never seen such a beautiful. She was exactly as old as I, 3 days older, I think. And we got to know them, and they helped us to come. And
so you met them in Germany. They
Yeah.
came to Germany, and
Yeah.
so they knew you.
yeah, we knew them. So, and they were kind enough to help us out.
Now,
Help
how
us
did
to-
you make contact with them? From Germany?
Yeah, from Germany.
And when you arrived, in okay,
I don't even think it was smuggling out, but that money, a little bit of money we had, just a little, and I don't know how it got out there. Very little. No,
on the tape. Would you like to?
I don't know. I don't know. But we were
I
not
have this
allowed
back.
we were not allowed to take any money out. We were allowed to take our furniture and clothes out, but we were not allowed to take money out.
Why don't we repeat that all for the tape? We're just taking a break now.
Yeah, I don't know if it's interesting or not.
Well, I think it's very interesting.
So my father and mother, we smuggled cameras out of Germany. We smuggled them out, literally, like us.
Let's skip that on the tape.
And it was
wanna wear you
awful.
out.
And we got nothing for it. You know, Leicas are unbelievably expensive cameras, but we sold them for practically nothing because that was all we could rescue. And that under a practically death threat.
Okay, just tell me when we should start again. Pardon me? Now, how did you support yourself? Were you able to take any money out of Germany?
No, we were not able. $10. Again, I say, I don't know if it was $10 or 10 marks. I'm not quite sure, but it was 10. So I think it was probably $10 we were able to take out.
Or were you able to bring anything else out?
I mean, we were able to bring our clothes and furniture. My parents packed what they call a lift. It was like a great big box where they brought the furniture out, and we could, at that time still, we could bring things out, but no money. But this little money I had brought to Luxembourg, that helped me survive in New York while I was waiting for my parents to come. So it wasn't much, but better than $10. And so my parents, they bought some cameras like us, which we heard were much in demand in the United States. So they bought quite a few like us, and there was somebody always specialized in something and takes the opportunity. And there was somebody who introduced us to somebody in New York who bought like us, and it was ridiculously cheap. I mean, for them they probably, but for us it meant being able to eat.
Now, these cameras were from Germany or Luxembourg?
No, Germany.
Germany.
Yeah. So that we sold the cameras, and so that was, I had very strange experiences when I waited for my parents to come. Everything was unbelievable. They came, and I had rented a room with this German Jewish family I lived with. Then the people had, one of their children broke out with measles, and we were not smart enough to know that one doesn't get the measles twice, so everybody advised me, don't stay there. So my parents came with practically no money, so we had to, at the last moment, find us a room someplace else. We had to take a taxi, drive around in New York trying to find a room. Well, we surely didn't have money to stay at the Waldorf Astoria, so we stayed at some flea thing hotel. It was just terrible, just terrible. So we stayed there for the first night. The next day, we somehow, through some people, we found out that there was a German Jewish family who had sort of pension, as they call it in Europe. They rented out rooms to other people and also gave them meals on Riverside Drive, so we moved there. But with the very little money we had, I still remember, we drove around New York with a taxi.
Looking for a place.
Looking for a place to live. I thought, of all things, the little money we have to run around and look for a room. It was wild, really.
I can't imagine doing that there today.
Yeah, really.
Now, when you got to Nashville, where did you live?
Well, did we live? Well, at first we got a little, also a room. See, we knew Lily and Erna and her family, and they lived on 16th Avenue South, and they got us, I guess, a couple of rooms upstairs until our lift came, our furniture came, and then we rented a house on 16th Avenue, and I got a job in Mayhosier Mills at the office, and my father worked first also in the office and then in the factory, and my mother, and we rented out a room to Elsa Frank and Harry Sternheimer, and my mother worked at Kornman's for a while, and that was the way it started.
Now, was this all on 16th Avenue also?
Yeah.
And what about English? Did you know English?
I knew English amazingly well. It sounds like I'm bragging, but it's the truth. I had 3 years of English and 6 years of French, but I really didn't know French all that well. But I had a fabulous English teacher. I still remember her, Fräulein Zimmermann. And I really did amazingly well with English. It was hard to understand at first, but I really managed well for the whole family, because I knew, and that is when I told you a little while ago how we tried for my aunt and uncle to get out, that I always was the one who went begging for somebody to vouch, because I was the only one in the family who could speak English well enough to negotiate these things. So.
Now, tell me what you tried to do for your aunt and uncle.
To try somebody to give them the affidavit to get out. But
and who did you go to?
Oh, I forgot. Several members of this community, and Mortimer May tried to convince people to do that, and try to convince them that it most likely wouldn't cost them a dime, but it was just to enable people to get out. But it was hard to convince anybody. And then my uncle and aunt it was when finally this Kirshner family vouched for them, it was too late. They were no longer, we couldn't reach them anymore. So.
And why could Mortimer May not help them himself?
Because the American government would not take any more affidavits, because I think he had given over 200. And because legally, he really was responsible, even so I don't think anybody ever caused him any trouble, even for a nickel. But legally, if somebody would have needed help, he would have had to give it, and I think the government just wouldn't accept anymore, because it probably really wouldn't have been possible for him to support more than 200 people, So that was it.
Now, did you try to get any other family members out?
No, that was all. I had an aunt and uncle. We helped them to come over, but also Mortimer helped them to come out. My mother's sister and brother-in-law and my grandmother, they came out.
But this wasn't the ones you had?
Those were the ones. Those were not the ones. This was my father's sister and her husband, and their son was already with us when this all happened.
And the aunt and uncle that you tried to help, then, did they ever get out?
We don't know. We never heard anything anymore. They probably had to go to Auschwitz, Buchenwald or something. I forever really feel sort of responsible, and when I think about it, I feel guilty about it, and yet I feel like I did everything I could. But I really I don't know. I did everything I could, I know. And you cannot force people to do this if they don't understand and if they don't want to.
There was no one else in the community who would
Because Mortimer
sign
really
the
tried.
affidavit?
The Jewish community as a whole really, I think, did not realize at all what was going on. I really felt like that. They just didn't. I think they didn't have any sympathy for us either. Like now with the Russian Jewish people coming, I think the community is extremely sympathetic. And I think the people who come out of Russia, I don't think they really come out at all with the same problems we came out, because they more or less come out because they choose to come out, don't they, really? While we had the knife on our throat. I mean, it wasn't that we didn't like the circumstances in Germany. It wasn't because we didn't. It was because it was a matter of life or death. So, you know, but I think the Jewish community as a whole, I don't think grasped that. At least I think not.
Do you think it was a matter of not understanding or not caring?
I think it was a matter of not understanding, I think. I really don't think they would have not cared, but I just think they sort of distanced themselves from it all. That's what I had the feeling.
What differences about life in the United States compared to Europe struck you when you came here? What were some of the most notable features?
About life in general, or?
In the United States compared to life in Europe?
Well, for us, of course, it was freedom, and not to be afraid that somebody would put you in a concentration camp. That was probably the best part of it. As far as it had its status in the community, which didn't mean that much for me, but for my father it was very devastating too. He had a business and he was respected and he was a well-respected person in Germany. While here he was a poor immigrant, and it hurt him very badly. So much sometimes that he said, I wish I had stayed and gotten killed in a concentration camp. Really and truly, it hurt him terribly. He got sick soon afterwards, which he had, he became hyperthyroid, which might have had to do with his unhappiness. He was happy to be out, but it hurt him to be. I think when you're 18, you don't realize what it means to have accomplished a little bit something and have it taken away from you. Well, lots of my contemporaries, I always get sort of amused. Contemporaries, or even younger than me, act like they lost a fortune in Germany. They lost everything, when I always am terribly honest about it, that I really didn't. I mean, I lost a lot of fun in my youth and a lot of carefree life, but as far as material things, at 18 you hardly accumulate many material things, you know. So, but it was hard. It really was hard to be an immigrant in Nashville. It really was hard to be. I think it was hard. For me, it was hard to be. And I think to this day, I haven't quite gotten over it. I don't think I'll ever quite get over it.
To this day?
To this day.
You still feel like an immigrant?
It's funny that I don't feel like an immigrant with you, because I have never met you before. But my contemporaries, I don't want to mention them, I still feel sort of strange to these people. I feel like I'm still not measuring up, really. I still feel like that. I'm not measuring up to, it was hard for me. I think sometimes people my age, I think probably everybody will say that, people my age, everybody will say, had it hard. because everybody had their own problems. But I think sometimes I came at a terrible time because I was too old to be a little child and too young to be an adult. It was just the time in my life when young people have fun. And I was burdened down with earning a living to help support us. Other people's daughters at that time wondered how many evening dresses they should take to Vassar or Wellesley with them, and and I wondered how we would make ends meet, so.
And you feel that, when you say you didn't measure up, you mean that socially the others, the natives were ahead of you?
Yeah, because I felt always like I didn't measure up. But it's really only with my contemporaries, I think. And it was sort of, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I just tell it. These so-called wealthy people of the community felt like they ought to be doing something for the poor immigrants. So they invited little young girls like me to their parties or something, meaning very well. And in retrospect, I felt like I wish they hadn't invited me because I really didn't belong there. I didn't belong in there. Mentally, I didn't belong. They were worried about their boyfriends and their clothes and their parties and their dances, and I wasn't any part of that. So I think sometimes I used to think, I think it would have been better not to be thrown together with these, because it wasn't the young girls who wanted me, it was their mothers who were, who thought, let's invite this girl. I don't think it was the girls, the 18-year-old girls who thought, we better invite this girl. It was their mothers who thought, don't you think you better invite Elsa? And there I was, isolated, and my mother would say, why don't you go to this party? Why don't you go? And I couldn't quite, I felt like I ought to be grateful, I guess, that they invited me, when in reality, I think it did me in, I think, sometimes. Really, it presented a sort of another thing is, I think, in retrospect, I don't think one should stay in a city like Nashville when one is an immigrant. I think one should move on. I think one should move to a community where you didn't come to as an immigrant. That's what I thought. A lot of times, because
you wish that you had left.
Yeah, I mean it's as I get older, it's different. But while I was still a little bit younger, I always thought it's best to go where you just, whoever you are. You're not. I know. I don't know why I should tell you that, but maybe I will tell you that. I even can tell you the name of these people. Erna Price's daughter. You know her, that Lainey Cook is her name. I mean, that immensely. She married Bobby Dushan, her first marriage, and very, very pretty girl. And I heard people say, isn't it great that he is marrying this little immigrant girl? Now, Lainey Dushan is no more an immigrant than you are an immigrant. It was her parents who came. And so I thought, isn't there ever going to be an end to that? That they call her the little immigrant girl when, I thought, see, this is when you stay in the community where you came to, this bothered me that this lady said, he's marrying that little immigrant girl. She was Phi Beta Kappa, went to Emory University, got a Fulbright grant, and so in the eyes of some of the people who were here when her mother and father came, they called her still the little immigrant girl. That's a little much, don't you think?
Overwhelming. And
yeah.
What you see, makes you wonder what you're up against.
Yeah, the little immigrant girl. So, well, so those are little experiences, really.
I also meant to ask you, what did your father do for a living in Nashville?
Well, he first worked at Mayhosiery Mills in the
You did
office.
too?
I did too. And then came in 1937, there was sort of a depression kind of a time, a recession sort of a thing. They kept me on because they kept me on. And Daddy, they made him work in the factory, and he swept floors, and he said, I cannot do that. I just cannot go and sweep floors at Mayhosiery Mill. And he quit, and he started a peddling business. He just sold things and
What did he peddle?
clothes and things like that. So.
And whatever happened to that business? Did he have to travel then?
Yeah, he traveled, but then he died in 1955. He died.
So was he on his own, or was
Yeah,
he working
was
for
on his
another?
own. No, he was on his own.
Did you, after the war, did you ever try to go back to Germany?
I never have. Yeah, after
Oh, we were-
after so many newcomers, I should be.
Did you ever try to go back to Europe
Never
after
have.
the war?
Never have.
Was there any reason why?
Well, most of it, I think, because I really, well, it cost a lot to go. It's expensive, and then for many years I looked after my mother. My father died in 1955, and I kind of looked after mother from then on, and I didn't want to leave her to. I wouldn't say unsupervised, but I felt like I better stay around, and she had many bad times, broke hips 3 times, and once with a hip and 2 wrists, and she had many lung problems and operations and whatnot. It was just, I couldn't make myself go, so.
Is she still living?
No, she died 10 years ago, almost 91 years old.
Do you think you would want to go back if
I don't
money was
know.
no-
I sometimes I think I would, and sometimes I think I rather remember things as they were than I don't know. I think everybody but me has been back. I really think so.
Have you made contact with any members of your family that you were separated from?
I think we have contact with everybody who got out, sort of, yeah.
Where are they now?
Well, we have some relatives in Israel. It's in Israel and in France. Those are my first cousins.
And how did you find these people?
Well, my cousin in Israel is my first cousin. He's the brother of this boy who grew up in our house. And the ones in France, where we kept sort of in contact, they were hidden for years in France, my uncle. And see, they left, they fled, and they went to France, and then they came back to the Saar region, and the Saar region always went back and forth from France to Germany, but then they had to go across the border to France, and then Hitler invaded France, and they had to go into the interior of France, and they were hidden for years because the anti-Semitism. I mean, they did the same thing with the Jews in France then as they did in Germany, but I mean, my uncle and aunt are both dead. They had 2 children when they left Germany. They had a girl and a boy, and were poor. I have never seen such poverty. They really had nothing. And my aunt became pregnant. She was 40 or something, 40 or even early 40s. And with all this, no money, no nothing, she was pregnant. And I talked to this cousin of mine the other day, that one who came after my aunt. The oldest girl was 18 and the boy was 15 when this girl was born. And she talked to me the other day. She has 2 sons who are both physicians. One is a psychiatrist in France, and the other one is in Chicago. He's a physician too, but he's now getting a PhD. in biomedical things, biomedical, whatever you call it. But so I have contact with all of them, but they live in France. Also, another interesting thing is what happens to people. One of the cousins of, they're in France, has 2 daughters. One of them married a French boy who became a cantor, and he had a job in Mannheim, Germany, for years. Isn't that strange? But now they moved back to France, and they all are doing fine now. But they had a terrible time under Hitler in France.
Well, like, did you maintain contact with them throughout?
Not during all that.
How did you find them again then?
I guess after it was all over, I think they probably, I really don't remember how we got together again. But I guess maybe we still had the same address or something. I really don't know how we found each other again.
And what about the cousin in Israel? You don't remember? Do you remember how you found him?
Oh yeah. Well, also because we through my cousin here, who is his brother. He really had a time. He went there at 15, entered the kibbutz. Then after that, he went into the Israeli army. After the army, he went to high school, to university, and he got a PhD at age 57. Can you believe that? In the meantime, he was in Ghana teaching people how to fish or something like that. And they're amazing people, really. He got a PhD at age 57.
Is he still in Israel?
And yeah, he lives in Jerusalem. His wife was everybody has a story. His wife was a little girl from Poland who wandered along the streets in Poland, and somebody picked her up. Her parents were killed. Somebody picked her up, and somehow she got to France. She doesn't even know. She was 5 years old. And she went to France and somehow ended up in Israel. And so, really amazing stories, isn't it? But they have 2 daughters, so they still live in Jerusalem. But he was here last year for 2 months at the university, at the Hebrew University in Cincinnati, doing some research of all what's happening. So,
on the Holocaust?
Yeah, on the Holocaust. Yeah. His name is Menachem Kaufman. That's about my story, I guess.
Well, how do you feel that these experiences with the war and coming to America have changed you? Do you look at life or at other people differently than you once did?
I really don't know. I was really not old enough yet to have a real life. I think in 18 one doesn't have so much of a life yet to have perspective of. I guess I pictured my life different from, as I say to my husband, I guess I wasn't born to be a maid, I sometimes say. You know, at that time people had maids, and it was just, I think I expected to not work as hard as I have to work now, I think, but otherwise, I don't know.
Well, how long did you work at the hosiery factory?
I worked at my hosiery mills until the very end of 41, until November 41, or October 41.
And then what did you do?
And then I'm almost pouring my heart out. My mother, at that time, was terribly unhappy that I was not a popular girl, that I didn't seem like I would ever have a chance to get married, most likely, which was, at that time, uppermost in Mother's minds. So she really wished I would go to Chicago or New York or something where there were other young boys and young girls, and maybe I would have more of a chance to meet somebody. So I liked opera a lot. Opera is my main love, and they had the opera season in Chicago, and I decided, why not spend my vacation in Chicago? So I went and spent my vacation, went to every opera they had for 7 days. And I stayed in Chicago. I decided I had a good time, and I thought, I might as well stay in Chicago. And my mother had some friends in Chicago, and you know those people too. I mean, I don't know, but this lady was a good friend of my mother's, was Miss Windmiller's sister. And they had moved to Chicago, and they invited me to stay with them and have a room there and be kind of my adopted family. So I stayed, and I got a job, and
Where? What kind of
in
job?
Chicago, and I got
What
a
kind of
job in
job?
an office, and I did payroll in that office. I learned to do comptometer at that time in Nashville. I did payroll work, and I was happy in a way. I missed my family terribly, but I met other young people, and I went to play ping pong and bowling, and I went to dances, and I just was more accepted. I was just one of the other German Jewish people, and that was. And then eventually I met my husband in Chicago.
In Chicago?
Yeah, I met my husband in Chicago.
At one of these dances?
At bowling, I think I met him at bowling, and then we went to the same dance. We were not dated or anything. I went with somebody else who insisted that I wasn't going to be his date. He was just going to transport me to the dance on the south side. I lived on the north side, but John was there too. And that was that we had known each other already several months, but that started it. Somehow that dance started it. And then we dated for a while, and then was World War II. And he went into the army, and I followed him for a while, stayed in Chicago, followed him to different camps, and then he went overseas. And so then that was it.
And then after the war, you came back to Nashville?
We came back to Nashville. We stayed back to Nashville. I guess I was still very attached to my family. So we came to Nashville.
Do you have children?
One son.
One son. And has your whole experience had any effect on him?
I don't believe it had any. I don't think. I don't think
the way
it
you
had.
raised him, or things that...
I don't think it had any. The only effect I can really say, when he was little, we decided we wanted to speak German to him, because we both felt like to learn another language without any effort would be heaven. Not to have to study a foreign language. And I thought, to pick up a language without having to study. But it didn't work. It didn't work. He got it all mixed up, played with other children, and got German and English mixed up, and the little other children wouldn't understand what he was talking about. So we thought, no, that doesn't seem to be the right thing to do either. So he understood German for a long, long time, because we lived with my parents for a long, long time, because after World War II there was no housing available. There was no place to move. And even if there was no place to move, there were no cars. You're all too young to remember that. There were no cars, because, the war effort took all the cars and all the shoes and all the everything. So in order to go someplace, to find a place to live, we really had to have a car. So the first thing was to be able to get a car, so we lived with my parents, and our son really understood German, I would think, perfect. But little by little, it went away.
So he didn't stay with them?
No, so I don't believe he still understands some, but I don't think he really was affected. That's what I say. Maybe he thinks he was affected by it. I don't know. Maybe from his point of view, maybe he was affected by it. Maybe he didn't think that he didn't have all the breaks he might have had. I don't know. I think sometimes he does, because he went to Vanderbilt. We wanted him a little bit to go to Vanderbilt because it was nice to have him at home, and besides, it was lots less expensive than to go away to school. And I think part of it, I think he resents still, I think, that he went to Vanderbilt instead of going someplace else. I think he doesn't say that, but I think he would probably think that, because both of his children are away at school.
So is he living in Nashville?
No, our son lives in Montgomery, Alabama. But the oldest grandson is going to graduate from Princeton in a month, and the younger one goes to the University of Virginia. So apparently he didn't think the University of Alabama or Auburn or anything was good enough. So.
Or he wanted them to have that experience.
Yeah, he wanted them to have that living away from home experience and all. So maybe it affected his life in a way that we were poor immigrants or something.
How do you feel about being Jewish? And did your feelings about Judaism change, or the way you practiced it change?
No, it really didn't. It didn't change, no.
And how do you feel about it now? And do you have any thoughts about the experience as as a Jew, or as?
You mean?
Or
what do you mean by?
I mean, about has the experience affected the way you look at
religiously? You mean,
or yeah, religiously or at other?
Well, I don't think it really has affected me. No, I don't think so. I do get angry sometimes, I think, because I feel like, no, I don't think I should say that, because I feel angry sometimes. I feel like, why wasn't there somebody higher up who kept the Jews from being burned in the concentration camp or being cremated or something? Yeah, it has affected me, I think. It has affected me. Other people go the other way, but this cousin, both of my cousins, the professors, both of them, Irvin in Arizona and Menachem in Israel, I don't think they... The one in Arizona was extremely religious. I mean, he was really orthodox, as orthodox can be when he came here. But he threw it all overboard. I mean, he's still Jewish, and he feels Jewish and is Jewish, but religiously, religion doesn't mean anything to him. And I think, I've never really discussed it with him, but I think really that losing his parents was the cause of it. I really think so.
And did you find your observance change because of it?
I think so. I really think so.
In what way?
Well, I don't have faith. I don't have faith. I just, I feel like, why did this all have to happen? I mean, after all, there was no reason for this to happen, for perfectly wonderful people to be shipped into a gas chamber and be cremated because we were Jews. I mean, they didn't do anything. It was just by accident of birth. And so it's hard to have faith. Other people are affected just the other way around, and I'm happy for them, and I think I really admire, and I'm jealous of people who have a lot of faith. I think they go through life easy because there's somebody watching, but I just have a hard time.
Now that you have told me your story, is there anything else you would like others to know, or is there any other message you would like other people to remember about your experiences?
Well, don't ever let it happen again, I guess. Tell the story, make it so that people realize what happened. And I don't think I have any special message, but I hope it never happens again. That's the big message, and you know, that's about it. I hope it never happens again, and I think sometimes we don't have any guarantees that it will never happen again. I don't know what one can do about it. Just love to be in Israel in many ways because of, you don't have the anti-Semitism in Israel, but then you have these ultra-Orthodox Jews there who almost destroy Israel with their ultra-Orthodox means, and that is frightening to me. Really.
Well, I want to thank you again for your time.
Well, I enjoyed it.